We're going to start with the drawing that we've been using for several of the steps. So this is that same drawing with multiple objects that we did a thumbnail, a small study sketch of, that we used those vertical axes to help center these balanced, symmetrical human-made objects. Then we talked about the contour, the edges, and if you rotate a contour around, anybody who's done any animation software, it's almost like a single direction wireframe. That is called cross contour. Now we're going to actually do the technique that is most often used. It's the technique that derived from printing in the earlier technology days, pre-digital. If you wanted to print something, you had to be able to do it using a line medium, a way that lines created light and shadow and texture. So this technique that we're going to be looking at using pencil is the same technique that was used to print paper, illustrations, images. The only time you still see this technique used is if you pull any currency out of your wallet. And I don't have my wallet, but I'll show you on the next enhancement of this technique. Look at any bill, 1, 5, 10, 20, if you're lucky to have more than that, and you'll notice that all of the value, all of the light and shadow that you see in whoever's portrait is on there, or whichever Washington architectural monument that's on there, all of it, when you get up close, is simply made up of crisscrossing lines. So crisscrossing lines is the technique that we're going to be talking about. And we already did cross contour line, and that leads us immediately into what's called cross hatch. So we're going to be talking about cross hatching as a technique. And cross hatching, when artists do it, it is generally loose and fluid. It doesn't feel like a machine. If you're using a digital media, or if you were taking drafting, sometimes it can look very, very mechanical. We're going to look at what the different variations of cross-hatching, and then we'll come back and talk about how you would apply those to a drawing. So the most obvious, and in fact the reason it's called cross-hatching, any single direction line. So I'm making the same direction line, I'm increasing the distance between the line, and I'm decreasing the weight of the line, so I can come back to this side and do more of it. I can come through there. So I'm using single direction lines, which are called hatches. So a hatch pattern, would be the most basic example of cross-hatching. You can achieve an entire drawing using single direction lines and just varying the line weights, meaning the light and darkness, and the frequency, how often they are repeated. There would be a reason why you would want to do something that simple, but you could achieve a whole drawing if you wanted. So the most obvious, and where we get the title, is that you take hatching and you add a contrasting direction. So crosshatch is where you take that same, and I'm going to just keep it really simple. I'm just using that same basic direction hatch. And now I'm going to introduce a different. So now, on top of what I had, I'm going to put more lines that are going one direction, more lines that are going that intersecting cross direction. And that pattern, that crisscross pattern of any kind, is cross-hatching. The one that I think really creates interesting texture and a completely softer sense of pattern and surface, or implied texture, would be what is called scumbling. If anybody takes a painting class, scumbling is also a painting term, but in cross-hatching, scumbling refers to basically scribbling. So if I start just making scribble lines, and I can keep overlapping, so the frequency is increased, So now I'm releasing pressure and I'm using less frequency. So I could do the same thing. I could achieve, and I can come back up here, and now I'm putting more pressure and more frequency. I could also grab a different pencil if I wanted. Like here's a, let's see, here's a 6B. So if I grab a much darker pencil and do the same thing, I can also increase that contrast between the line weight and the frequency of the line and the technique. So hatching, cross-hatching, scumbling, and any of those can be used in a drawing. And when generally as an artist doing a loose sketch, you'll sort of combine all of them. So hatching, cross-hatching, scumbling, and then the one that is often misunderstood or thought to be extremely limited, we think of it as pointillism, where you make any kind of little dot. And it doesn't have to just be dots. It can really just be almost like we have this, you're looking under a microscope and you have this little active surface with a lot of moving sort of dot dash shapes. Or you could be really strict and keep it absolutely. And again, I could pick up a much, much lighter pencil. I can increase the frequency. I can go back through, darken. So I could create that dark to light, which is called a gradation. I could create that gradation of dark to light in any of these combinations. And pointillism, and when we look at actually incorporating this in a drawing, I'll give you the term that's often used for, but most of the time I find that students are familiar with the word pointillism. So hatching, cross-hatching, scumbling, pointillism, and then invented, anything you want to do. So invented simply means you come up with any pattern. If I'm thinking, again, a gradation dark to light, I could, decide I want to use curvy lines that sort of line up next to each other approximately. Once again, I could just overlap those lines, make them darker, let them get lighter. I could create any kind of an overlapping pattern, which is like cross-hatching, but instead is something that is much less regular. If anybody has any familiarity with weaving patterns, you could think you could make it like a herringbone or a chevron. Those are some of the names if we were in a graphic design class for different patterns. So you have hatching, cross-hatching, scumbling, pointillism, or any kind of invented pattern. Those are the basic tools that you have which would fit under this broad category of cross-hatching.